can we really believe that God wrote some book? Can we really believe that it happened the way he said? If there is a God who made it, can we really trust him? We're going to look at that question together over the next 8 weeks as we go through the Bible together. Now, I realize that as we do this, some of you are going to be off angle, not able to see this. So don't worry, we're going to be drawing a little bit together. So if you have your pens and your tic-tac-toe board that came with you, not the booklet, but the actual tic-tac-toe board, I'll be drawing here during our time together. If you don't see it first time up, we're going to hang it up here in the tic-tac-toe board so you can delay a bit on the drawings. But either way, we'll make sure you can see it. We're going to start drawing in the top left. We're going to go left to right as we go through. But the idea that there once was a world that God made that was without pain, without difficulty, maybe that's hard to believe. It's like that last song, we wish for it, it would be nice, but it's too good to be true. Is God really reliable? That's the question. During Christmas break, I read the biography of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was wrestling with that question himself, and he traces back a pivotal moment in his life when he decided the very concept of God was no longer reliable to him. He was reading in Life magazine, and on the cover there was a picture of 2 starving children. And he was just struck that there were children living in the world that were going to die and starve to death. He took the magazine, he rolled it up under his shirt. He went to see his pastor. He wasn't a big fan. His adopted parents had drug him to their Lutheran church. He wasn't a big fan of it, but he thought he'd give it a shot. He showed up that day and wanted to meet with the pastor. And he said, "Hey, pastor, I got a question for you. Does God know everything?" "Oh, yes, Steve. God knows everything." He said, "If I put my hand behind my back, would God know how many fingers I'm holding up?" "Oh, yes, Steve. He would know how many fingers you're holding up." He said, "Is God all-powerful? Can he do anything?" "Oh, yes. God is all-powerful and all-knowing." Steve reached into his coat and he pulled out that Life magazine article and he said, "Does God know about this? And if so, why doesn't he do anything about it?" "Well, Steve, the problem of evil is hard to understand, and I know you're not going to understand," but Steve said that was the moment that he decided that whatever faith, whatever religion, whatever philosophies are out there, he could no longer trust in God as reliable, a God who would allow this kind of stuff to happen in the world. Is God reliable? As a team, we have, at our church, we have different pastors on staff, we have different volunteers on staff, different small group leaders, and we're constantly trying to just help folks process through different questions. And one of those is that, is God reliable? Recently, I had a guy come in, a professional, who sat down with me and he said, "I'm really struggling with worry. I'm worried about the future. I'm worried about a new job that I have. I'm worried if I'm up to do it. I find myself just bombarded with if-onlys and what-ifs, and I got it, it's all up to me, and if I don't, then what's going to happen?" And we talked for 20 minutes together. I said, "Well, let me ask you this. Instead of working on your worry, over and over I've heard as you talked, you've said, 'It's all up to me, it's all up to me, it's all up to me.' Is it possible that underneath your worry is the belief that it's your job to take care of the present and it's your job to take care of the future, and there's nobody or a God that can take care of the details of life, so you can't trust it to him, so you're trying to do it all yourself?" He said, "Yeah, that's exactly right." I said, "So in some sense, you can't trust God to be reliable, so therefore you've got to take care of it all, and it's wearing you out." That is exactly what I'm doing. At the core of his worry, he acknowledged, was I can't trust God to be reliable for the future, or the present for that matter. Oh, maybe God's viable. Maybe he wound up the universe and made a few stars and made a few of this, but to trust him in life, does he still get involved today? That was the question he was asking. And the Bible says that at the core of every human being's heart, we are all wrestling with this thing. We might believe God is viable, but we don't believe he's reliable. The core struggle of every human being, whether you're kicking the tires on faith or you're a longtime follower of Christ, the core struggle we all wrestle with day in and day out is, yeah, God's viable, but is he reliable? Can I trust him to keep the scales, or do I have to hold a grudge? Can I trust him to control the future, or do I have to worry? Can I trust his plan? Can I trust that his ways are better than my instincts? And the answer, most of the time what comes from our heart is no, God's not reliable. So as we go through the first two books of the Bible today, we're going to find God addressing this very issue. Is he viable or is he reliable? We're going to begin, if you have your tic-tac-toe board, we'll start in the top left. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And he made the earth. And unlike other philosophies of other religions who give us stories of creation, who made creation out of anger, or out of lust, or to get back at one of the foreign gods, the story and account of the Bible is that the creation was made out of joy. In fact, the opening chapter of Genesis is like a song. He made this in the chorus, and it was good. And he made this in the chorus, it was good. Over and over and over again, the chorus we hear is it is good. It was made out of joy. God was spreading his happiness, and God was spreading his joy, and he wanted to spread his artistry and spread his music. But he wanted somebody to share it with. He wanted someone made in his image who could enjoy and trust him for friendship, trust him to meet their needs. So he made a man named Adam. He made him in his image. He said, I want you to trust me for my love, trust me for friendship. I want you to trust me to anticipate your needs. Well, Adam went looking, do I have a partner here on earth that I could enjoy this with? And God said, trust me, you take a little nap and I'll take care of that. And he did, and he trusts God, and God made Eve. And they were trusting him. And they were living in a pain-free world with no stress and no worry and no devastation and no sickness and no cancer. It was all good. And they were trusting God. They were trusting him for friendship. They were trusting him for peace. They were trusting him for his plan. Well, God took Adam and Eve and he placed them in a paradise. He said, I want you to not only trust me for love, but I want you to know I am reliable to protect you. So he placed them in a garden paradise. And in this garden paradise, he said they could enjoy all of the creation of all of the trees and all of the beauty and all of the music and all of the wonders. But he said, trust me, I need to warn you about something. There is one tree that's filled with darkness, the tree of knowledge and good and evil. And you do not want to experience evil. You do not want to experience pain. If you eat of the tree, the fruit of that tree, you'll be separated from each other. There'll be darkness in your life. You'll taste of things and experience things you never wanted. So trust me. I love you enough to warn you. Trust my warnings. And they did. For a little bit. Along came temptation in the form of a snake. And temptation said, God's not reliable. You can't trust God. You can't trust him to warn you. He's not warning you. He's holding out on you. If you eat that, you're not going to die. You're not going to be shame or blame or that nonsense. God knows the day you eat of that, you're going to be like him. God is so insecure. He's insecure about sharing his joy. If you eat that, you'll be like him. So Adam and Eve made a decision. They decided that God wasn't reliable. He was their viable creator. He was able to create the world, but he wasn't trustworthy when it came to warning. So they ate of the tree, and the darkness spread. All of a sudden, they were filled with shame and guilt. All of creation was suddenly out of sync. All of a sudden, everything changed. Everything was broken. God came down and said, did you eat of the tree? Did you not trust me for my warning? And God said, I will make a way that you can have forgiveness. And I will actually make a way that we will crush this problem of death that's come into the world. But not yet. It'll come someday. Well, that darkness spread. The darkness spread to their ancestors. It spread even to their kids. Cain had anger come over him one day and jealousy from his brother. The darkness spread to him. And God said, trust me. Your anger is crouching at your door. Trust me to handle it or you're going to do things you never wanted to do. Trust me, Cain. And Cain didn't trust him. And he killed off his brother. And the darkness spread. Generation after generation after generation. And eventually that darkness spread so that the Bible says that every intent of a human's heart was evil. And God came down and saw all the evil and all the wickedness. And he looked for anyone who would trust him and trust his ways. And he came across a man named Noah. He said, Noah, will you trust me? And Noah did. Then I want you to build a barge, a giant barge. And I want you to trust me for protection. Because there is danger coming. there is a flood coming. And that flood is going to bring danger into your life. And I want you to trust me for a way of escape. I want you to trust me. And I want you to tell other people to trust me. So he became a preacher of righteousness, or a preacher of trust me. Trust God. He's warning us of incoming danger, and he's making a way of escape. But people laughed. Yeah, sure, it's going to rain in the middle of a desert. Yeah, right, you need a barge that big, a football field-sized barge? Right. They laughed. God can't be trusted. What a silly thing. What a silly Noah. And so no one trusted God except Noah and his family. He got on the ark, and sure enough, just as God said, his word was reliable. A flood did come. And those who didn't trust him didn't experience his protection. They got off about a year later, and God put a rainbow in the sky. And that rainbow was, you can trust me. What I said happened, and it did. The way of escape worked, and it did. And I will never flood the earth like this again. You can trust me as reliable. Well, Noah and his descendants got out, and they began to have children, and had children and children. And God said, now, this is going to be a tough one. Because if there's one area that's very challenging for people to trust me in, it's in facing the unknown and facing the future. He said, I want you to go out and enjoy the new land. It's been washed clean. It's fresh. There's new resources. There's new pieces. There's new experiences. I want you to trust me with the unknown. But if there's one thing it's hard to trust God with, it's the unknown. He said, spread out. So they said, we don't want to spread out. So instead they built a tower. Archaeologists have discovered many of these. They call them ziggurats. This tower, not that God's not against building things, but this particular tower was a sign that they would not trust God to spread out. They could not trust him with the unknown. They were filled with fear, and they were filled with pride. This particular tower, they thought they were going to build a tower to God because they knew better and could build better and could reach higher than God. Well, their rebelliousness and their wickedness and their evil was headed in the same direction as it was in the days of Noah. So God came down, and in order to limit their evil and to limit their corruption, he confused their language. This tower is called the Tower of Babel. Because here at the Tower of Babel, he confused their languages, and by doing that, they had to spread out, and they had to go out into the unknown, and they had to begin to rely on him and trust him. So they spread out, but they didn't trust him for very long. In fact, of all the different nations that were formed that spread out into the earth, there was one living in a land called Ur. And this man's name was Abram. And God came to Abram and said, Abram, will you trust me? Will you trust me as reliable? I've got a promise for you. Well, as with every Bible character, he has a beard. So we need to draw him with a beard. And Abraham and his wife were wrestling with infertility. They were wrestling with barrenness. And God said, if you trust my promise, I'll bring you a son. I'll bring you a child. More than that, I will bring you, a whole nation will come out of you. More than that, I will bring something through your descendants who will be the final forgiver. He'll be the one I told Adam could ultimately crush death, will come through your family line if you trust me. But in order to trust me, I need you to do a couple things. One is you need to believe in me to make you righteous instead of your own works. Secondly, you need to leave your family behind and trust me with the unknown. Well, the first thing we learn about Abraham is he didn't. He did not trust God. He took his family along. He's on his way through Egypt and he lies. He tells the Egyptian Pharaoh that his wife is really his sister because he's afraid he's a schlub and she's good looking and the Pharaoh will kill him off. And then he does it again. And still he waits and he says, we can't trust God. Where's the child? Where's the child? So his wife and he concoct a plan. He says, how about you sleep with the maidservant, Hagar? And they have a son, Ishmael. God shows up and says, that's not what I was calling trusting. This is not plan A. Trust me. We're in our 80s, we're in our 90s, it's too late. God says, it's never too late, you can trust me. And he comes to them when they're 99 and 100, and he says, I know you feel like I've taken too long, but I'm going to bring about that son of promise. And they burst out laughing. We're going to be the only couple going to Walmart and picking up Depends and Pampers at the same time. And they laughed. And the word laughter means Isaac, and that's why they named their son Isaac, which means laughter, because it was laughable that they could get pregnant to this point. It was laughable that God could do this, and yet God did. And Abram's name was changed to Abraham because he would be the father of many in his family line. Many. But it began with Isaac. And Isaac had 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. And Jacob was a wrestler. His whole life he will wrestle. God will come to him and say, Jacob, you can trust me to be reliable. You can trust me in my timing and my plan. Well, Jacob the wrestler had a wrestling uniform. His name, Jacob, literally means liar, deceiver, and he lived up to it. He wrestled his way with his brother to see who could get out first, because the first one out of the womb with his twin brother would get the blessing. His brother won out, so he lost the wrestling match. But later on, as his brother got older, his brother was starved to death. And he said, I can wrestle the blessing out of him here. I'll trade you this soup for that blessing. And he wrestled it away from him. But his brother didn't keep to the promise. So later on, his father Isaac was getting very old and he couldn't see very well. So Jacob decided to wrestle the promise away from his dad. He dressed up like his brother and he put on a furry garment because his brother was a mammoth of a man and a hunter and was very furry. He came in and he said, hey, Dad.
Hey, Dad. This is Esau. Time for the blessing.
Are you sure it's you? Sounds like Jacob.
No, it's not. No, it's definitely Esau.
And he wrestles the blessing out of his father. His brother comes home. His brother's furious. Meanwhile, God is saying, trust me. You don't need to manipulate. You don't need to control everything. I'm all powerful. I can make this happen. Well, he runs away from his brother who's trying to kill him, and he hangs out with his uncle, another L, Laban. His uncle, Laban, says, hey, you work for me for 7 years, and I'll let you marry my daughter. He works for 7 years, and Laban gives the other daughter to him in marriage. Surprise. And he works another 7 years to marry the daughter he loved, and now dysfunction is all over the family, because now he's married to 2 sisters, one of which Dad gave because no one would marry her. And Jacob is finally struck by what it feels like to be manipulated and lied to by Laban. And God appears to him that night. The angel of the Lord appears to Jacob and says, Jacob, let's wrestle. And they wrestle all night. And they wrestle and they wrestle and they wrestle. And the whole time Jacob's saying, bless me, bless me. I want to know that God's reliable, but I can't trust him. I got to do it on my own. I got to wrestle it on my own. It's all about me. And the angel says, no, trust me is reliable. Trust me to handle the future. If you do that, I'll take care of it all. And that night, Jacob decides to trust him, and his name is changed from liar to Israel. And he's the number 12 as a wrestler because he has 12 sons. The 12 sons of Israel, or the 12 sons of Jacob. And at that moment, he returns. His brother forgives him. And Jacob and Esau are reunited, trusting God for the future. But Jacob's 12 sons, God comes to one of those sons, and his name is Joseph. And of course, Joseph has a Technicolor Dreamcoat, as you probably know. Where did he get that Technicolor Dreamcoat? Well, from his father. You see, his father, though he had trusted God to be reliable, it didn't mean he was a great dad. Just like everyone who went before him, there was nobody who did it right. There was nobody who trusted God. They would do one thing right, and they'd do 100 things wrong. So God came to Joseph in his Technicolor Dreamcoat. And he said, will you trust me? I got a plan for you, and I'm going to use you to change the known world. But the way we're going to go about it, it's going to be weird, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be strange. But can you trust me? Because you're going to go through some difficult times, and you're going to think that God has left the building. You're going to think there's no way God's still on the throne. You're going to say there's no way God is for me. Joseph says, I'll trust you. He tells his brother about God's plan. The brothers aren't real thrilled. They're not real thrilled to see him in Dad's favorite coat. They're not real thrilled that Dad favors him over them. So they kill him. Well, they pretend to. They throw him into a pit. They take an animal and they put the blood all over the coat. They go to their own father and they show this coat with blood on it as their dad is weeping. Jacob is weeping. The wrestler is weeping. Oh, my son, my son. And they all kept quiet and they watched their dad grieve over a lost son. Meanwhile, they sold Joseph off. He's thrown into a pit. He's sold into slavery. He's eventually falsely accused and thrown in prison. He sits in prison, and surely God's not trustworthy now. Surely God's not reliable now. And God comes to him and says, I am with you. Trust me. Trust you? A baker and a taster are thrown into prison. He interprets a dream for both of them, and the dreams come true, and his interpretation's true. He says, don't forget about me, but they, of course, forget about him. But a few years later, the Pharaoh has a dream. He says, do we know anybody who can interpret dreams? And one guy says, hey, I know a guy who I met in prison. So they pull him out. And Joseph comes and they dress him up. Can you interpret the dream? Well, I can't, but my God can. He's reliable. God's reliable, the one that's have you sitting in prison? Yeah. Well, what's the dream? 7 fat cows are going to be eaten by 7 skinny cows. Wow, did you eat something last night? No, the interpretations will be 7 years of goodness followed by 7 years of famine. And God is warning us that we can rely on his forecast. So let's take the next 7 years and save 20% of our income so that when the 7 years of famine come, we'll have some restoration and we'll have some leftovers to help during that time. Pharaoh says, I like that. That's a reliable plan. You're in charge. And Joseph becomes the second in command of the entire empire. Meanwhile, the famine strikes 7 years later. The famine strikes in Egypt. And the famine spreads all the way over to Israel where his family is. And Israel has to send 10 of his sons. He doesn't send his youngest because he's afraid of trusting them with the brothers. But the 10 come and they meet up with Joseph. They don't recognize him. And Joseph provides for his enemies, those who had thrown him away. He provides for his family. And ultimately he forgives them. And he gives us his promise, his secret to forgiving people, even cruel people. He says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good in the saving of many lives. He trusted God to be the judge so he could be a forgiver. He trusted God and he provided for those who had rejected him. And he moved his whole family. Israel and all 12 sons were now living in Egypt. They were living in Egypt. Joseph had saved the world. God was reliable. God's plan was working. But like anything in life, one moment you save the world and the next moment nobody even remembers who you are. Isn't that how it works? A new Pharaoh comes to play and he doesn't remember Joseph for anything he did. He just sees all these descendants of Israel, hundreds, thousands. And he says, we got to do something about this. So he enslaves all of them. So now the entire nation's in slavery and they're forced to take straw and make bricks. And for 400 years they say, God has left the building, God's not in charge, God doesn't care about us. And yet God says, trust me for my strength and trust me to be the deliverer. And sure enough, God shows up. He shows up in a burning bush. And he sends a man named Moses. And he says, Moses, I want you to trust me to be the deliverer. I want you to trust my power and trust my strength. Trust me. And Moses says, I don't want to go to Egypt. It represents a bad time in my life. It represents my greatest fear. I can't do it. And besides, I have a stuttering problem. And you don't want somebody who stutters to be your spokesman. God says, trust me. Trust me. I'll take care of it. I'll be the deliverer. And Moses reluctantly does. He says, all right, God, I'll trust you. And he comes to the Pharaoh. And as he comes to the Pharaoh, he says, Pharaoh, let my people go. God wants his people to come and have a friendship with him and a relationship with him and to trust him. But you got to let him out of bondage. You need to exit them or exodus them. Exit. Pharaoh says no. So God says, trust me, I'm going to make a way of forgiveness and a way of exit. He sends 10 plagues, each one aimed at one of the Egyptian gods, proving which God is reliable. Who can take care of the darkness? Not that God. Who can take care of the frogs? Not that God. Who can take care of the, and on and on and on, 9 plagues. And God is saying to everyone, the Israelites and the Egyptians, I am the viable and I am the reliable God. Trust me. But the 10th plague, he says, is going to require you to act. And it's going to seem weird. And if ever you went, well, this doesn't seem like a very reliable plan. I want you to take a lamb, the most perfect lamb you can find. And that perfect lamb, you're going to have to kill that lamb. What? How cruel is that? This will be an object lesson to remind you that all the years of all the ways you've fallen short and separated yourself from God, not trusted me, something has to die in your place. And then I want you to take the blood from that lamb and put it over your doorpost. And when that happens, this 10th plague will pass over you. And you will be trusting in something else to die for you and something else to forgive you and something else to protect you. And through that, I will make a way of escape. Well, it's not just the Israelites. The Egyptians, by this point, after 9 plagues, are like, we'll do that. And many Egyptians, as well as Israelites, decide to trust God for his forgiveness plan. And that night they do. And that night, anyone who trusted his weird, unique way of forgiveness escaped that final plague. And God exited them through the Red Sea, and he brought them out into the wilderness, and he gave them the 10 Commandments to teach them what a good life looked like, and then at the same time, it showed that nobody lived it and why they needed forgiveness. And he gave them manna and taught them how to trust him and to see him as reliable. Those are the books of Genesis through Exodus. And the key application for you and I, where does it come back for you? What should we do? Here's the key takeaway. I want to encourage you this year to move from viable to reliable. If you're still kicking the tires on faith and you're not sure if the Bible's true, this is the year to look into it. Let's take your best objection, your best question, and let's find out if it's really viable. Just because you read it in a Reader's Digest or a college professor somewhere said it, let's dig into it. We want to help you. You can believe whatever you want at Horizon. We're yours to explore. We want to help you explore your questions and doubts. Are they really viable? Is the Bible really true? We're going to talk about that in about 4 weeks. What about the problem of evil? We'll talk about that in 5 weeks. Was Jesus really who he said he was? We'll talk about that in 6 weeks. But make this the year you move from viable to reliable. And if you consider yourself a follower of Christ, we all struggle with the same question. But can I really trust him? Does his plan work? Is he with me during difficulty? Can I really give up wrestling? Can he really be my forgiver? Does he really have enough power to overcome that? He's waiting way too long. It's the same question. How will I move from viable to reliable? I read a blog. It's called the Business Guy blog. It's by a business guy. And he talks about his journey from viable to reliable. And he said that one of the challenges for him is, as he began to look at his faith journey, as he began to look at what he's done over the years, he realized that the first year of marriage, that was the time for him to begin to take this journey. And here's what he says. He says, after our first year of marriage, I realized that I didn't really trust God, and I wanted to begin that journey together. In fact, I began to trust God in the little things, to see if I could trust him, to see if he would pull through. I began to see him change me. I was a mess when we first got married, and I still am in a lot of ways. But as I learned to trust God in the little things, it began to heal my marriage. It began to change my life. My wife began to see these differences and changes in me. I was beginning to see God as reliable. New Year's Day, or New Year's night, it was 11:57. We were sitting in bed, my wife and I was praying about, can I really trust God to be reliable this year? I look back over last year and the whirlwind of my son's blindness and being diagnosed with autism and the belief I still operate under many times, which is it's all up to me as a dad. It's all up to me as a husband. It's all up to me. And I was praying that night. It was 11:57. And I was praying about being a better dad to Sierra and Javen and a better husband to Beth. And I was praying and saying, God, I want to trust you for what's going on in Quinn's life. I got all choked up just sitting there praying out loud with my wife. And I've been asking God for wisdom as to whether or not we should have this surgery with Quinn's eye. And I don't know if it's the right thing to do or not. I'm saying, God, I'm trying to trust you, but I don't know. He's in the 1% of verbal skills. We don't even know how to listen to him. He doesn't even talk. Well, all over spring break, he kept taking his finger and poking his eye. I'm like, stop poking your eye out. It's like the Red Ryder BB gun. He kept poking his eye. I'm like, stop that. And as I sat in bed that night, I looked at the clock, and I thought I'd poke my own eye. So I went and did what he did, and all of a sudden I realized that the clock, when I poked my eye, the 11:57 went out of alignment. I could see 2 of them. And I realized that that's what he sees all the time. And when he really wants to look, he pushes his eye and the images come together. And he had found a way to self-correct his own eye issues, and God worked through that to say, he's talking, I'm talking. Chad, you can come up with all the plans and all the wrestling and all the manipulation you want. You would never have come up with poke your eye. I'll give you that. God, if I can handle this kind of detail, and if I can create the world and the universe, you can trust me with the details of your life. And so in 2012, am going to take a few specific areas of my life to move from viable to reliable. And I'd encourage you to do the same. And we want to make that as easy as possible for you. In fact, I want to give you 3 ways you can do it. We'll put it up on the screen. As you came in today, many of you got a book, a Fast Track book. And that Fast Track booklet, you can read in about 45 minutes. It will take some of the stuff we're doing here today, but it will actually go into a little more detail. You can read from Genesis to Revelation in about 45